You are listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, I had the opportunity to interview Cindy Ingram. Cindy, a former art museum instructor, is the author of the nonfiction book Art is About Being Whole, a memoir. I'm here with Cindy Ingram, who is an artist and the author of a memoir, Art is About Being Whole. Cindy, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Cindy Ingram, and I have run a business for about 10 years now, helping art teachers connect with works of art. And as I was working through sort of my philosophy of art and art education running this business, I started to realize that my connection to art was really deep, and that, well, I always knew that, but that I started to realize that it was something more than just teaching and learning about art, that it was about sort of a deep personal connection. So I wrote a memoir about my connection to art. And what's unique about the memoir is that each chapter is a work of art that I take and I interpret at the same time as telling my story. So you kind of learn my story, basically my mental health journey from like shame and anxiety to a place of wholeness, while at the same time learning about a lot of different works of art along the way. So that just came out in October 2023.
Now, without spoiling too much of your memoir, Art is About Being Whole, what is it about?
It is about, it's about my journey from, when I was younger, mainly in my 20s, I was riddled with social anxiety and shame and perfectionism and body image issues and all the things, and undiagnosed ADHD. And I just really thought I was broken beyond repair. And the book sort of chronicles how I got better, basically, how I figured out what was happening with me, how I healed, how I came to a place where I kind of accept myself as I am without trying to impress anybody else. And so each chapter kind of dives into different themes about, that journey. So there's body image, there's shame, there's burnout, there, connecting with my inner child, healing from trauma, that sort of thing.
What is wholeness and why is it important?
Yeah, wholeness it's basically the acceptance of who you are as you are today. It's that you're not broken and you don't need to be fixed. It's not trying to fit into places where you don't fit. And so you're not trying to be who you're not. So you feel it's really sort of an authentic, peaceful, content place with who you are as you are. And you said, why is it important? Because I saw a Facebook meme, I think it was yesterday. It was, who was it? It was a quote by Jim Carrey, I think. And he was like, I want everyone to be rich and famous so they can learn that being rich and famous isn't the answer to all their problems. And I think that, we see people, no matter where they're at in their life in terms of how much money they have or what job they have or where they live. I always thought my solutions to my problems were external. I thought, if I could just get the next job, if I could just get a little bit more money, if I could just live in this little slightly nicer house, then I would be okay. But your problems really follow you everywhere you go. So wholeness is just being happy where you're at now and accepting it. You can still have growth and you can still strive for more, but that you do feel kind of good in your skin now. And that, I think, that's where the magic can happen. That's when you can be your most creative. That's when you're most happy. That's when you're most authentic and doing the best work in the world, when you have that feeling.
Now, I hope I don't embarrass you with this question, but who designed the cover for your memoir?
It's not embarrassing. I did the artwork. And so that artwork, that it's a collage mixed media piece based off of the painting Girl Before a Mirror by Pablo Picasso. And in the book, the very first chapter, that's the featured artwork. And I had a really powerful reaction to that artwork when I was 23, maybe. It was in 2004. And when I saw the painting, it's a girl before a mirror. The external girl is like kind of polished and put together, and she's like has makeup on or whatever, and the inside is just this sort of purple, and it's this like these deep colors, and it's really kind of distorted. And that's how I felt when I looked at it. I felt like my inside wasn't matching my outside, that I was filled with sort of pain. And so by the end of the book, I sort of start making my own art. And so I did a collage mixed media work based off of the girl in the mirror. And so that's kind of where it started. And then I have a designer, Rachel Lapwit, who's brilliant, who did the layout for the book. And she did the, the typology and the placement of the artwork and all of that. So it's a two-part answer.
Now I'm going to pivot back to something you said in your introduction. You own a small business that helps art teachers. Are you an art teacher yourself, or do you just own a business that helps art teachers?
I am a former art teacher. So
Okay.
I started my career as a museum educator. Then I went into the classroom. And when I went into the classroom, I realized like the way I wanted to teach was kind of like how I taught in the museum, but there wasn't a lot of resources out there for actually teaching art appreciation and art history. So I decided to create the resource that I had been looking for. And that's where my business, Art Class Curator, came from.
Is your memoir self-published, traditionally published, or published by a hybrid press?
It's hybrid.
Okay, what was the name of the publisher?
Compassionate Mind Collaborative.
And
cannot recommend working with her, Heather Doyle Fraser, highly enough. Like I don't think this book would be even a fraction of how good it ended up being without Heather's work, because she used to work in traditional publishing as a development editor, and her suggestions and ideas are brilliant, and she's able to really see who you are and able to help you pull out things that you didn't even know you could do. Like this book is filled with poetry, and I haven't written a poem since I was a kid, but I used to write tons of poems. And she was like, one day she was like, what do you think about adding poetry to your book? And I kind of freaked out because I hadn't written a poem in 20 years, but I went back through my writing and I'm like, oh, I have been writing poems this whole time. They were just wrapped up as paragraphs. There were prose. And so she was just able to notice these things that I didn't notice about myself. So it was a really, really wonderful experience.
How has writing your memoir changed you as a person?
Oh, wow. It's changed me in so many different ways. I have always been like a really quick action taker type of person, where, I get an idea and I do it, and I get an idea and I do it. And that's what running an online business has been. It's like, I just get to act on my ideas and I get to do it really quickly. But with writing a book, you can't just have an idea and put it out there within 24 hours like I normally do. I actually had to really become more committed to the overall process of writing. And that really allowed me to slow down, allowed me a lot more peace. It allowed me to, I started making art again, which I hadn't made in 20 years, besides like for my classroom, like examples for my classroom or whatever. I didn't actually make my own art for a very long time. And I sort of have taken that commitment to the process and letting the process guide the work into other areas of my life. And it has been pretty amazing. I have a writing group. So if you work with Heather at Compassionate Mind Collaborative, she has a writing group basically every day. And I made the decision. I was like, this book's not going to get written if I don't make the commitment to show up to that every time, every single day, whether I feel like it or not. And that has been really revolutionary because um, I know because I used to just wait for inspiration to strike and then I would write. Now I know I kind of have to be there every day for that inspiration to kind of know what to glom onto. Um, yeah, it's just, and having something physical I can hold. That's like all this stuff I've made in my career has been all digital, and it's been amazing. And I'm really proud of everything I've created. But having this book, um, it feels like nothing else I've ever felt. I don't know. It's the pride I feel in it is amazing.
What are some major differences between how you approach writing a book and how you approach creating various forms of artwork?
Oh, that's a great question. It actually is very similar, and I learned that it was similar along the way because I didn't make art for a really long time because I thought that, and it doesn't make any sense that I thought this because my degree is in art history, my undergraduate degree is in art history, and I've been a museum educator and art teacher. I've been helping people connect with art for my whole career. I've been connecting with art my whole career. I know a lot about artists and how they work, but for some reason I thought that to be an artist, I had to have the idea first, and then I had to then just make the idea appear on the canvas or whatever. Like that, I had to start with the idea and then make it happen. Um, but I learned through writing this book, like this book when I started was not a memoir. It was like an art education book. It was going to be about how to help other people connect with works of art. And it wasn't going to be, it was going to use myself kind of as an example here and there, but it was not going to be a memoir. It was very different. But I learned through showing up every day to writing practice that if I lean into the process, then I know that I can, that like the magic will happen and that it will unfold as it will and as it's meant to. And so when I started to make art again, I allowed myself to lean into the process. I just decided to show up at my art desk that I created and just do whatever felt like the right thing to do instead of expecting perfection right out of the gate. Like I was expecting this like perfect idea to show up and then I just create this perfect thing, but that's not how writing a book is, and that's not how making art is either. And so they have been really complementary processes. And I did this all of my art to start in an art journal, and I finished the first draft of my book like within a couple weeks of finishing my first art journal. And so they were really processes that developed together. Very similar in very similar ways. It's just allowing the process to unfold.
You mentioned that your book was originally supposed to be an art education nonfiction book, and it became a memoir nonfiction book. At what point did you realize your book was going to be a memoir and not an art education textbook of sorts?
Yeah, it was my first one-on-one session with Heather from Compassion Mind Collaborative. I had been in her writing group for a while, and I had written 50,000 words by the time I like hired her to like help publish the book. I had written 50,000 words. I show up and I'm like, hey, I'm almost done. I was like, this is like, I've got a whole book here almost. And I just, need some help figuring out what to do next or whatever. And we started to talk about it. And within that first call, she asked these clarifying questions about, what I wanted people to get out of it and who I wanted to read it and what I wanted to happen when they read it and all this stuff. And I realized in that call that I had written half of two books. The first half was very art education. It was very explainy. There was like a chapter on like appropriation. There was a chapter on gender. There's all this stuff. And then the second half was examples of this deep connection that's possible with art, but it was still very academic. Like there was a lot more like references and a lot more, pulling from research and things like that. but what I really truly wanted when someone reads my book was I wanted them to feel the connection that I feel to art, and I wanted them to feel the power of it. And you can't have them feel the power of it by telling them it's powerful. You have to actually show them it. So we realized that really the last half of my book was the right direction. It still needed a lot to kind of take out a lot of that academic stuff and then format it as a memoir. But I think by the end of that 1 hour call, we realized we kind of came to the conclusion together that this was a memoir that I was writing. And once I knew that, yeah, it became a lot easier to write. It became a lot because it was really kind of it was kind of confusing to me when I was writing it at that point, because it did that tension between what it was trying to do and what it was actually doing was very different. So
why is it important to take art out of lecture halls and into the hearts, minds, and lives of everyone?
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, it's a lot of people have these views of what art is and who art is for. And most people, I used to do this activity when I was teaching. I used to teach community college, and I would do this activity with my students where they would have to personify an art museum. So they would have to like write a little essay about if an art museum were a person, what would that person be like? And that was a really amazing answers, but it was always like they're rich, they're snobby, they're like hipster, they're like they think they're too good for you. Like it was all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, that is a really predominant view of what art is about. And a lot of people think that they are missing something to like that they're missing some gene or some a bit of knowledge or something, that they just don't get art and they never will because they don't have the right something. They're missing something. And I've learned in my career through working with people of all ages that everybody has the ability to connect with art, and everyone has the ability to interpret it. Everyone has the ability to get something out of it. Everyone has the ability to enjoy it, but they just don't ever give themselves those chances. And they also view art as this thing that they have to learn about. And they view art and artists as people and things that are above them. And that if they don't like it, then they're not good enough. And to me, that's not what art is, and that's not what it ever has been about. And so I want to show people that there's another way, that you don't have to, that artists are people too. They're humans just like everyone else, and that the art that they make is an expression of that humanity, that basic thing that we all share. And so I like to kind of take art off the pedestal and even when you teach art history in college, they like, it's in a dark room and you just kind of look up at these dark slides and someone's just talking. And that's not how you engage with art. It's not how, it's not how you listen to music. That's not how you read books. Like you bring yourself into the process when you read a book, and you bring yourself into the process when you listen to music. And I think a lot of people aren't bringing themselves into the experience when they're looking at art. And so, I'm trying to change that and help people see the power of art.
How has your relationship with art changed throughout your life?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I just knew that it was something I needed. And I knew, like, I love to draw and I love to make things. And but I lived in a small town and we did have an art museum. I just I didn't know until later that it existed. And the only art that I had was Disney movies. And so, I grew up with the generation where like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Lion King, those were my childhood movies. Lion King came out when I was in the 8th grade, and I watched it 12 times at the movie theater. And it just had this, I just would look at it. I would watch that opening scene, The Circle of Life, and I would cry every single time the sky opened up and like shined down when Rafiki was holding up Simba. Like every time it would make me cry. So I knew that like art had this ability to move me in ways that I couldn't be moved in my life in general, because a lot of us grew up in times where feelings and emotions were not very well accepted in our households, in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Like, we didn't talk about feelings. We didn't talk about things that made you different. We, none of that, none of that. And so I would stuff in all my emotions. But when I was with art, I felt safe to feel things. So even when I did discover that real art existed, I would just feel moved, and I would feel like the closest I've ever really gotten to a really truly spiritual experience. It was just like this connection with my humanity and everything. And that really has not changed at all. I still am that way. I still have those same experiences. I think I just understand them more now. I know to give into them. Like, I don't get freaked out by those experiences. And then also, like, there was a period of time where art was my job. And so it became like I kind of felt a little bit more removed from it. So there was a period of time where I would look at art and it would be like, oh, I would look at it through the lens of how am I going to teach it? And that was kind of when I started to get disconnected to art. And then I kind of reconnected back when I realized that was happening. I couldn't look at art the way I always have. And I also couldn't write anymore either. And so those were some like big red flags there. I was like, there's something wrong here. These two things that have always been a part of who I am, I can't do anymore. So it's kind of like I've used art as a guidepost, or yeah, I guess guidepost is the best word I can think of right now for it. There's another word that I can't quite get it, but it'll come to me in about an hour.
That happens to me as well. Yeah. My final question: what does the creative process teach us about life?
Oh, gosh, I could probably talk about that for an hour. I would say my first thought is to not take things quite so seriously. The creative process is engaged in very serious things, serious thoughts and emotions and fears, and it brings up all the things, but I think I know that when I'm engaged in my creativity, whether it's writing or whether it's making art, or even experiencing other people's art, going to the theater or listening to music or whatever it is, or reading, like those instances are when I feel the most at peace. As someone who's always had a certain degree of anxiety, depression too, mostly anxiety has been my main thing through my life. But I don't feel anxious when I make art, and I don't feel anxious when I look at art and I engage in art. It's like the problems of the world kind of melt away, and I think it just shows me what's truly important, and it allows me to be present and mindful. And I think that's probably why I'm not anxious, because I'm not stewing on what's next, or I'm not stewing on something that happened last week or what's going to happen next week. Is that I'm truly here in this moment, doing something with my mind and my body that is kind of fully engrossing. And so I would say, yeah, just it teaches like a presence and a mindfulness that I think, a lot of research has shown to be like a secret to a happy life, is when you can stay in the present. And then let's see. Yeah, I guess. I think I'm happy with that. I think I could probably tell you a couple more reasons, but it's probably things I've already said. Answers to other questions.
Cindy, you were an amazing guest for the Heartland Author podcast, and I thank you for appearing on here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
I always enjoy interviewing creative people like Cindy. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Facebook at authoraac and on Instagram at aacscribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.